It's been such a long time since I've had to work a job that just has nothing to do with my interests.
Welcome to Artists in Offices, a podcast that explores, through interviews with working artists, the idea that the work you do for pay supports the work you do for love. Or does it? I'm your host, Rebecca Bird Grigsby, visual artist, crafty generalist, and dance enthusiast. Having quit my full-time day job in 2017, I'm currently a recovering artist in offices, rebooting my studio practice while trying to figure out my next career move. Each episode of this podcast explores the perspective of an individual artist juggling their creative practice with their day job. In episode 9, I speak with Nicole Kita, a Northern California artist who works by day as an educator and advocate for artists with developmental disabilities.
My name is Nicole Kita. I'm 36. I live at the very most northern part of California, up here in Humboldt County. And that, like, the largest city closest to where I am is called Eureka. That's where I am right now at work.
Nicole is a teaching artist at the Studio and Canvas and Clay Gallery in Eureka, California.
The short answer that I usually give people when they ask me what I do is I say that I'm a teacher. I work for a nonprofit arts organization working with artists with developmental disabilities.
Tell me a little bit more about your path to art. I'm always curious in these interviews if, as a kid, was artist with a capital A something that you wanted to be when you grew up?
I definitely was not exposed to the arts as a child. I did not grow up in a creative family. I don't think anyone in my family still to this day has ever gone to an art museum or the theater or watched any performing arts. My parents actually really pushed me super hard to go into the medical profession, just for financial stability and job security. And actually, they wouldn't even let me take an art class until I was in my second semester of my junior year in high school. So I came a little late to it, other than, just kind of casually drawing in school and stuff like that. But it wasn't really an arena that was really supported in my home. Kind of the game changer for me and my personal biography, kind of winning over my parents' approval in a way, is that I was awarded a really generous art scholarship to go to college, which otherwise we had no money to pay for college. And so, that really kind of allowed me to pursue art.
Yeah, well, that's a good segue to my next question. So can you keep going on in talking about your formal training? Where did you, or, did you go to an art school for college, or did you major in art at a liberal arts university? What did that look like for you?
Yeah, I went to a liberal arts college in Central Florida. It's called Florida Southern College, where I got my BFA, and it's really close to where I grew up. And then the year after I graduated from undergrad, I taught elementary school art locally while I was applying to grad school. And then I went to the museum school in Boston for grad school and worked at the school itself for years, both teaching and working in the print department. A few years after that, moved on to Chicago.
So backing up just a little bit, when you were in high school, once your parents did sort of allow you to pursue art, can you elaborate on that a little bit? What kinds of classes did you take? How did you get the scholarship? Was that something that you had to apply for? Were you strategic in doing that and kind of convincing your parents that was something you wanted to pursue more formally?
I feel like it was pretty fortuitous how it all came together. I think I had enough AP classes available to me that I was able to dedicate, if I'm remembering this correctly, a pretty good amount of my junior and senior year towards taking art classes. And so just kind of dove into as much as possible. I had a really wonderful high school art teacher who I still keep in touch with her even today. And, we did pretty diverse media, actual darkroom photography and painting and drawing and ceramics. And yeah, I just, kind of slowly started gathering a portfolio as part of the AP portfolio requirement. And then some of my classmates and I did some of the portfolios down at Ringling School, where you actually meet with like kind of this national board of school admissions offices. But it was actually like a local college that essentially almost offered me a full ride based on my art portfolio. So that was, very, very easy to say yes to.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you say you got a late start, but once you got the green light, you were kind of all in.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I feel like growing up in Central Florida, which is a pretty regressive area, like culturally, it was really nice to just kind of dive in and have like a platform to express myself, other than piercing my nose and dyeing my hair.
I'm just curious, just to linger on that kind of time in your life for a moment, did that compete at all with anything else you were considering pursuing professionally?
I mean, again, my parents were really strong arming me into trying to do something in the medical profession, whether that be nursing or basically even like medical receptionist. I mean, neither one of my parents went to college, and my sister took a couple college classes, but she didn't end up sticking with it. And so there was really just that really, really, really like strong arm of like, we're going to make sure you pursue something where you're going to have financial stability and support. And so I guess like under their strict direction, that probably would have been another likely candidate. And I feel like kind of their way to justify some of my choices to them, like I'd often talk about like wanting to pursue the arts in an avenue, like something like stage direction, or even trying to work for like Disney. I remember kind of like having to satisfy so many other people's conversations of, what that would look like, whether that be teaching, even really early on then, like, it was always presented that you could never just be an artist.
Right. There's always this practical concern. You're either going to have a day job or sort of apply it in some practical way.
Definitely.
I think that's pretty common. So you got your BFA. Can you talk a little bit about what you studied there? Like, what did that look like for you, your undergraduate experience?
Yeah, I had a very positive undergrad experience. Classes were small. I took everything from math to human physiology. It was just a really well-rounded experience for me, which I'm really grateful for. I mean, we were required to take all such sorts of diverse media, which I know, like, coming from, having relationships now with people who earn their BFAs from just pure art schools, not having the foundations of taking intro to graphic design classes or, ceramics 1 through 3, even if you're not identifying as like a 3D artist. I feel like it was just a really, really great, like well-rounded program. Had a really great art history program where we traveled abroad every summer. Yeah, I had a really just good experience.
Mm-hmm. And so you said the year between undergrad and grad school for you taught art at an elementary school. Was that at all a motivation for you in going to grad school, like to be able to teach at the college level?
It actually this is the thing about kind of living in small areas, and especially that long ago, really it was just, I was solicited for the job. Like I didn't even have to apply for it. It's just, there's such a need for, well-educated teachers in Florida, especially for the arts, which are not generally like as well supported as they could. And so what's interesting is I was very determined at the beginning of that graduation process to be applying. And as you know, it's such an ordeal to apply. It's like a full-time job. And I think if anything, it kind of helped me kind of challenge the decision whether I wanted to go to grad school or not, because I felt like teaching in the classroom was really positive. And for the time and the place, I felt like the money was pretty decent. I think minimum wage was around $5 then. So, making something like $13 an hour, felt pretty comfortable. But ultimately I had like a really strong core group of professors from my undergrad, and some close friends who were really pushing me to go to grad school, just because Florida, can be a little bit of like a cultural trap. Sometimes hard to leave like your hometown.
So for you, going to grad school was more kind of to kind of continue developing your practice and expand your kind of cultural like community, it sounds like.
Definitely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But you took that year. Did you try to apply straight through or did you do that strategically? Like you took that year to teach and work on applying all at the same time?
Yeah, it was all at the same time. So while I was teaching, I was applying as well.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. That is, I remember applying to grad school because I did it two years in a row because I didn't get in anywhere the first time. It's definitely felt like a full-time job.
It's also like the era of slides. Like, do you remember taking slides?
Oh yeah, totally. I feel like we were like because I've talked to some people I feel like I've talked to people kind of in our cohort and like 1 year after. And I feel like that was it. Like it was digital after that. Mm-hmm, like we just, we were like the last wave of slide portfolios. Oh yeah, I still have my carousels. I don't know why I keep them.
I think I ended up donating my carousels, but I still have a copy of all my slides because I don't know. Yeah, something so sentimental about it. I just remember how hard it was to prepare those portfolios where you're on the roof at your college on a gray day and you're taking photographs and you just have no idea what's going to turn out or not turn out. It's just so much work and just such a different format than, I feel like doing it digitally.
Yeah. Well, and you don't know what you're going to get until you get those slides back.
Exactly.
So it's like you put all this time and effort and then you might have to totally reshoot half of them.
My work was both really large and small, where I had small works on paper, but then I also had these human-sized, acrylic paintings on canvas. And so, just the physical challenges of trying to document that kind of work too.
Other than teaching that 1 year, can you talk a little bit more about other past jobs that you've had where you've been sort of juggling that work with kind of trying to make your own work in the studio?
Sure. I mean, I've been pretty fortunate that most of my jobs have been within the arts. While I was in undergrad, I worked part-time, at a bakery. And so just trying to balance schoolwork and always working on the weekend. Even when I first moved to Boston and started going to grad school, I worked at Blick Art Materials on the weekend. I've always just had another job, and I've always contemplated if that has compromised just what I was able to do in the studio. After I moved to Chicago, I made this decision while I was working at the museum school. I had gallery representation at the time. I was represented by a gallery on Newbury Street in Boston. And I just felt that even though I was really enjoying working at the museum school, I just felt that I needed to dedicate more time to my art practice because I was so fortunate to have gallery representation and people wanting to buy my work. And I'm just so slow and meticulous with my art practice that I just felt like I couldn't keep up. I felt a lot of pressure. And so part of that decision to move to Chicago, where the cost of living was so much lower, and just trying to kind of reframe my practice and my just ways of working. But unbeknownst to me at the time, because it was 2009, it was the height of the recession. Mm-hmm. I naively chose to leave a stable job and move halfway across the country. And I spent quite a bit of time unemployed in Chicago. My first few years there were pretty rough financially. I definitely was applying to everything and anything. I was applying to Starbucks. I think I applied to Safeway. Things were just definitely really rough there for a few years. And I got really nervous about some of the decisions that I had made. And then subsequently, the gallery actually closed. So, I feel like it's hard to kind of talk about my personal narrative or experience without including the recession, because some of the choices that I made were really ill-suited, and I kind of, felt a brunt of what was happening economically, including, again, just the big shift of no longer having gallery representation right after, acquiring it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think that for those of us who graduated around that time, kind of graduating into the recession, who knows how it would have gone if I hadn't graduated into a recession. But I think about that a lot too. expectations versus reality were like completely like didn't match up at all for a couple of years there, you know?
It's funny too for me because like I made that choice because I wasn't aware of like the other economic factors and climate happening around me. So it's kind of tough because I feel like I've maybe taken on a little bit more personal accountability for that environment that we were like essentially kind of walking into. I feel like it's given me like it's made me a little more cautious, and I think it's made me a little intimidated to not think things through 100% or to make moves, you know, even though I feel like the economy has, you know, completely rebounded for the most part. But yeah, I feel like those first few years in Chicago were really hard. And so I feel like it's kind of framed me to be a more cautious person.
I mean, I think also recession aside, you know, mentioning that the gallery that was representing you closed. I mean, it sounds like that was because of the recession, but there's something that happened here recently where this very coveted residency that over 200 people apply for 7 spots and you're encouraged to apply over and over again. Well, you know, it's essentially run by one person. And when that person decided she didn't want to live in the Bay Area anymore and moved to LA, that residency no longer exists. So I think it kind of speaks to like the impermanence of some of these art institutions, I guess, for lack of a better word. Like these things that we try to get are not as kind of permanent as we think, you know? So I think that that's part of it too, is it's like the landscape is just always shifting depending on economic factors, obviously, but also just people. Like a lot of these things are run by people. And when those people decide to move on to something else, that option is no longer available. So backing up to, and we can talk a little bit more about your graduate school experience as well. But within your formal training, we talked a little bit in email about professional practices. So I'm always really interested, and I suspect this has changed over the last 10, 11 years a bit, but how was professional practices handled in your more formal training, both as an undergrad and as a grad student? And, you know, and specifically as an artist, and do you feel like it was effective? Were there things that kind of stand out that you feel were helpful in preparing you for, you know, the real world as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like just in general, my time in grad school completely flew by. I feel like even though it was a 3-year program, there was such an inability to take the classes that I was interested in, trying to balance the classes and curriculum we were both required to take. I know that I didn't take like an actual professional practices class when I was at the museum school, as far as I remember. But, you know, I feel like we worked really closely with professors who exhibited their work extensively and, you know, went to residencies and applied to grants often. And so I almost felt like kind of modeling that behavior in grad school, like prepared me to be an artist, you know, practicing artist if I had a college teaching schedule where you work, you know, 3 to 4 days a week and you have summers off. And, you know, for most of us, that isn't what our jobs are currently, you know, and I know that we had visiting artist lecturers come in and share their experiences and kind of how they make it work. But I feel like a lot of these conversations, again, like existed in a time and place that generously supported art, you know, from the years of 2005 to 2008, you know, like Boston, New York, you know, New England, the East Coast, you know, these are locations that art is sold on a very regular basis. And, you know, I myself benefited from that tremendously, you know, and I feel like you can even just make a shift and move to like a very blue collar kind of environment like Chicago and like, you know, buying art as soon as you start to get a little bit of money and start to become a little bit accomplished is just not as much of an intrinsic value to like that community. So I think, you know, I think that in grad school specifically, again, I think just professional practices was just trying to like model the success that you're seeing within your instructors, but like how a more diverse, you know, group of people were able to stay afloat, you know, I think is something that we kind of continue to reevaluate.
I suspect, again, I mean, I could do a whole series of interviews with people who have graduated more recently, but that the path to the kind of, that's why I always ask people if the motivation to go to grad school was to become a college level teacher, because I feel like that path is a little bit less, not that it was ever a guarantee, but it's even less sort of likely, especially graduating into the recession, but even since. And I feel like was definitely sort of grappling with, okay, if people aren't going to become teachers or designers, what are some other paths we can kind of show them? I feel like even the kind of the production level in grad school is so unlike, like everyone I've talked to has talked about how in grad school, whether they liked to or not, they were working so quickly and like producing so much stuff. And then you get into the real world and it's like, it's not a very realistic goal to like produce that much work that quickly. Like it's very difficult to sustain that level of production, like outside of school.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a privilege. It's such a privilege to spend that much time with yourself and your art practice and just explore every whim that you might have. I mean, it's so important, but, you know, at the same time, it's also just incredibly self-indulgent. And for most of us, that's not a life that we're able to afford for, you know, more than that short amount of time.
Getting to your work a little bit, can you describe your studio space or setup now? And how does this compare to studios or spaces that you've had in the past?
Yeah, so in terms of like my art practice, I do have a spare bedroom in my apartment at home, but it's it's cold, it's dark, it's carpeted. It's not conducive to the creative process whatsoever. So I really don't actually make artwork in that space. But I feel like the storage alone is, you know, just such an important configuration. I feel like I'm not the type of person who holds on to a lot of things. You know, like I own 3 pairs of shoes. Like I don't accumulate a lot of things in my life, but I feel like with my art materials or storing work, collecting towards an art show or something like that, like it's so important to hold on to that stuff. So I feel like that's like a really important space for that. But I feel like it really also just depends on like the type of medium that I'm working on.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if I'm working on like a larger silkscreen edition, I'll actually I have done some local printing here, both at home and in friends' studios. But like if I'm working on a larger edition, like I'll actually fly to Chicago and work at a studio that I used to work at there. You know, I am home alone for the last 2 summers. My boyfriend works in Alaska for 3 months at a time. And so although I'm still working my full-time job, I just essentially take over every square inch of our kitchen and parts of our dining room. And that's it just turns into this insane production mode for like ceramics, plaster casting. It just turns into like its own kind of makeshift studio for a few months.
Mm-hmm. And also I would imagine some of the, cause I feel this way when my husband is not here, I get so much more done. Cause that time that you would be spending, like, even if it's just watching a movie in the evening, you're more likely, if you're alone to like actually get something done.
Definitely. And I think that there's so much to be said about just also not having to like set up and clean up. I feel like, you know, sharing a space with another person means like, oh, okay, well, now that I've taken over the kitchen table, going to eat our meal, like I have to like clean everything up. And just being alone, like you're less accountable. And so you can just kind of leave everything in the like temporary disaster that it needs to be. So you can just come back the next day and get right back to work because that time is really limited. So, you know, like a lot of my work can happen on a laptop. You know, a lot of it has portability. So yeah, like I essentially don't use the designated studio space because it's like the worst space ever.
But I think your point about storage is really important. I think, share this sort of tendency to not collect a lot of stuff or need a large living space. But the way we handle our like ideal space requirements for our studio and the sort of almost collecting of potential art materials is like the complete opposite. Whether you have like a designated studio or not, just having like designated space. And then like you're saying, I think it's really interesting. This is the first time this has come up where you can kind of have a temporary, like I feel like the main benefit of having like a dedicated studio space that's outside of your home is that you can leave it kind of in that like temporary, what did you call it? Temporary disaster zone?
Sure.
Or, yeah. So it's kind of interesting that that you don't have a space like that. It sounds like that you're able to do that depending on how your living situation kind of fluctuates, like that you're able to do that kind of on a temporary basis, like a seasonal basis in a way.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like, I definitely can't, say enough amazing things about, like my former partner at Crosshair, Dan McAdam. It's his studio. And like, it's just like such a wonderful human being. Like anytime I want to try to come print with him, like he's made that available to me. So like, even though it's kind of absurd in a way to have to travel to another location to make your art, it's like when you're working with someone who has so much skill and expertise and you're working on a press and the margin of error is like essentially down to like an absolute minimum. And then you're essentially taking this like awesome art vacation / like self-designed residency, where you prepare all of this work in every capacity that you can, and then you can produce it most efficiently in this small little window of time. I feel like that's the best way for me to produce work, is to like, I have to kind of physically set some time out of my schedule, and I'll actually just request days off at work, even if it is just for like giving myself like a long weekend. Like I definitely am not able to utilize like after evening hours. It usually has to be a designated block of time.
Yeah, I think that is kind of the benefit and the model of like the residency, especially if your, day-to-day life is busy with other things. I wonder too if you feel a benefit in changing your location like that. Like not only are you, creating this kind of chunk of time, but you're like traveling halfway across the country to do the work.
Yeah, I mean, there's, so much that you can pack into a trip like that. And I feel like, part of the reason that I moved to Chicago from Boston originally is because it is such a large printmaking community. And so I feel like there will always be a sense of like what feels like home or what feels like my community there. I still have some really very close friends there. So it's definitely like a very important space for me. And, I hope it will continue to be.
Yeah. So before we talk about your current day job a little bit more, what sort of inspired the move from Chicago to, this sort of, would you describe it as rural area of Northern California?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like as much as I love Chicago and it's very easy for me to sing its praises, I just feel like the weather alone was such a difficulty for me. I feel like even here we're in this very isolated, geographically unique area where we're essentially in our own little like microclimate. There really aren't extreme weathers. I mean, it is winter now. It is definitely like raining way more, but essentially like the temperature doesn't fluctuate more than like a maximum of, 30 degrees like year round. Like it's always essentially like a t-shirt and, jeans. Like there's definitely never a day for tank tops and, shorts. It's just a really mild area. And I think it didn't take a lot of convincing me to try something new when it was like snowing in April. Like the year that I decided to leave Chicago, and especially as a commuter, like I've gone like 17 years in my life without a car. So like waiting for the bus and it's snowing on you in April, like you're just like, I can't do this. Like I was so willing to just try a different environment. And I wanted to move to the coast to just kind of explore this coast more. However, I feel like just being this geographically isolated has made it really difficult. I feel like I've only gone to like even San Francisco, like a handful of times, or like LA. Like I've gone to Portland a little bit more. We have some really close friends there. But again, I feel like it's a little more isolated than, will be able to just be sustainable. Like I've enjoyed my time out here, but it's, it's not going to be in the 5-year plan.
So it sounds like you didn't go out there for the job. You found the job after you moved out there?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you do now for work?
Sure. I I did not have this job when I first decided to move out here. But for the past 6 years, I've worked at a program called The Studio. It's here in Eureka. And the program is modeled after Creativity Explored in San Francisco. So we work with artists with disabilities and just like a really diverse range of art media, drawing, painting, sculpture, ceramics, video, performance. There's a really wide range of ages. Like we work with people, in their early 20s to their late 70s. And, there's really just never a dull day. It's more of an open studio than like teaching classes. Like our program's really very organic. We don't, other than the, typical Monday through Friday schedule, like there's no semesters, there's workshops, but there's not like formal classes. It's very fluid. It's just about supporting the artist and supporting their choices and help kind of, facilitating the art process into fruition for them.
Mm-hmm. And do you kind of help artists working in specific mediums? Is that kind of how it's organized in terms of the instructors?
Yeah. I've done a little bit of everything. When I first started working here, I actually got hired to work for most of my schedule of the week in our on-site gallery. So I was hired as both like a curator and a visual arts instructor. But since then, I've kind of stepped back and have just spent more time in the classroom. Yeah, essentially we kind of divide our program into like 2D, 3D, video workshop, more of the performing arts.
So what is your kind of workday routine right now? I think that you're a little bit unique in that you, even though I'm sort of using the like hashtag artists in offices, you don't sit in an office all day, but do you have a kind of typical weekly schedule?
Yeah, for me, that is the part of my schedule that's, pretty routine or, identifiable in terms of like that other larger, office structure is, I work essentially 8 to 4. The artists are at our program from about 9 to 2. And yeah, each day is a little different. Each day we have different artists that attend. Some artists attend 1 day a week. Some come all 5 days. So there's just like a lot of different kind of projects going on. It's, it's always very, very interesting. And, I feel like it's also really, it satisfies my creativity as well. I feel like I have worked, some jobs in the past, like even when I first moved here, I was working this temp job at a bookstore for College of the Redwoods, and it was just excruciating. Like it was so hard for me to work, even for, I think it was just a month or so in the capacity of like a cashier or like, it was just, it's been such a long time since I've had to work a job that just has nothing to do with my interests, and I feel like that was where I was starting to kind of have this like self-crisis. It's exactly what you're kind of saying in terms to like the paths where I was like, should I go back to school for graphic design or should I get my teaching credential? Because like, I can't be a fucking cashier. It was way too hard for me. So I felt really fortunate that I got the position that I applied for here. I feel like it's just such a, like an awesome program. I feel like it's easy for me to go on and on, but I feel like the artists here have really helped revitalize what I think art can be, far outside of academia or, just the commercial art world, art fairs. It's so refreshing and authentic and just awesome here.
Nicole is an example of an artist with a day job that, as she puts it, satisfies her creatively, speaking to some of the ways in which artists can contribute to their creative community outside of their studio practice, ideally while being paid for it. We don't just have like the work we do for pay and our creative practice. There's also this third thing that many of us try to sort of interact with our art community in a meaningful way that is not necessarily making money or our own work, but that if you're able to integrate like 2 of those 3 things, that's ideal because obviously we're working with like a finite kind of amount of time, a limited amount of time. Yeah. And so I think And then there are people who, it's very interesting to me because everybody has such a different strategy. Like, so I feel like, for you, it sounds like you definitely have that third thing you need to be doing that's not necessarily your work, and that you've been able to kind of integrate that. Like, it's important that the work you do for pay also satisfy that third thing.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I definitely feel like a social responsibility, just to like apply myself as much as possible. I feel like it's so important to work all the shitty jobs that we've ever worked. I mean, I started working like the week that I turned 16. I've never not had a job other than that brief time in Chicago. But yeah, I mean, I would be the most miserable cashier in the world. I'll tell you that.
I don't know. I think one strategy is like have a job that's not at all creative so that you kind of save up your creative energy. But for me, that it doesn't work that way. It's like if I'm...
No, I totally know what you mean. I feel like it's even like I have thought about leaving this job so I could try to make more money somewhere else, because this is a nonprofit, and the wages are, the wages reflect that, just to kind of exactly as you're saying, like just to like 100% like separate those two things where it's like clock in, clock out. Like I don't have to like have any of that energy taken from me, and then, find a structure where I can make my own work, especially if I worked even like a part-time job, if I made more money at a part-time job kind of balance. But ultimately, yeah, I feel like it is possible to try to balance all of those three options together, like you're saying. But, I do think another aspect of this job is just that it does require 100%. I feel like I have to be 100% present for like the emotional and behavioral, as well as like the physical and artistic support of the artists that I work with here. And so, I couldn't stay up till midnight, like, working on a drawing or, like glazing some vessels. Like I really have to be 100% while I'm here. And so I feel like compartmentalizing how I'm able to make work has been the easiest way for me to still make sure that I'm making work when I want to. The one time that I kind of try to throw it all together is for the last 3 years, I've been participating in the Renegade Craft Fair in Portland. And so that has been kind of a crunch time where, for many of the years, I've been able to make new bodies of work, ahead of time in Chicago, usually larger print editions or printing here, like some small cards or stationery, like printing small things here is pretty easy. But like that is, just trying to make sure there's a certain volume of work. That's kind of when I will push it, where like I'll leave work a little bit earlier. Like I'll try to leave work at like 2:30 or 3, and then I'll go home and I'll just glaze some vessels for a few hours. And like, that's the time where I'm really doing like the double duty, but it's more about kind of finishing the production of something I've already started. So essentially kind of more of like the busy work, like the glazing or the finishing. It's not really the like, like creative brainstorming process. I don't have like the mental capacity after like any given day of work here, to like be doing these brainstorming sessions like late at night. I'm definitely a day person. I'm definitely like most mentally aware and productive like in the morning.
I ask every artist if, given such limited studio time to begin with, there are any things outside of work and their creative practice that they feel they must squeeze in to make it all happen over the course of a week.
Trying to get to know yourself a little bit better has been, I think a challenge for all of us. But I feel like what I've finally gotten a little bit closer to balancing is also just like the dichotomy of my personality reflected by the weather. Again, like I don't live in a place with like tremendous shifts, but I essentially just wanted to hibernate when I lived places that were colder or snow or darker than this. And so I feel like it's been just, like really honestly, like a game changer even this year, finally joining a gym in the winter or trying to find things to do outside in the winter, like going for hikes to forage wild mushrooms is happening like right now. Like it's something you can really only do in winter here. Like I feel like I've just kind of finally figured out some of the things that I need to like not just be like a hibernating troll in the winter, because winter has always been a huge challenge for me. I feel like even just my biography has like this polarity in it because I'm Canadian. I lived in Canada until I was 8. And then I moved to Florida, which is just always like sunny and gratuitous. And I feel like I just thrive more in a warmer environment. Even just summer, like here in California, like the sun goes down at 9:30 at night, and I just feel amazing and productive and vibrant. And I just feel like I have 1,000 hours in my day. And then like this time of year is not the best for me, but I feel like I've gotten a lot better at it.
So similarly, along those lines of cramming and things that you don't have time for, can you talk a little bit more? I mean, it sounds like you get some of this kind of creative community fix in the work that you do for pay, but do you find time for studio visits and show openings? And, if so, how often do you try to fit those in?
Yeah, I mean, the art community here is pretty small. So like attending art openings or artist talks and networking, it's pretty easy to maintain. But I feel like to stay abreast of like the larger art world, I do rely a lot on traveling and then just also like social media. I feel like I'm, for many of us that are in such a geographically isolated area, like we rely on that more and more to just kind of stay on top of what's going on.
The benefit I see of social media, I feel like it can feel like this other thing that we have to do, but it definitely seems to be helping people stay connected regardless of where they live.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like it's important to just contribute to it, when possible. Again, with the geographical isolation, I feel like I'm past the point in my life where I'm maybe worried about how many followers I have or, kind of identifying through that, platform of success or, lack thereof. I do feel like social media, though, is a really important, again, platform for just visibility with all types of artists. In terms of my own work, I do have a website. I have an Etsy account that is linked from my website because I feel like that's a format people are really familiar with and comfortable.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about the going to Renegade Craft Fair and selling your work on Etsy? How does that fit into your overall kind of creative practice and life?
I feel like kind of giving yourself any deadline has really, because I've really benefited from that kind of schedule and that kind of structure, because I feel like it's really easy to have lack of just continuity with creative expression. I've always done the summer fairs, so it's become part of my regular routine of like this crunch time before the event. I feel like it's a pretty inclusive environment. Exhibiting fine art, there is, definitely like one platform. I also feel like I've kind of made and produced pieces that were like a little less personal to me, kind of both to learn the artistic medium and then and also hopes that they sell to kind of keep that machine itself functioning.
Yeah. Would you kind of put that in the like work you do for pay bucket? Not that it has to be put into a bucket, but I'm just curious if there's a distinction for you in that work that you produce that's, like you said, maybe a bit less personal to you versus, projects that are taking a bit more of your kind of creative brainstorming time, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's kind of all of the above. I feel like there are, again, with such a seemingly limited time in grad school, there's just so many medium, like just media exploration that I just don't feel like I've had a chance to pursue in like an academic environment. And so there's been things that I've wanted to try to learn how to do myself. And there's just been so much trial and error. And so I feel like for more recently, within the last 2 years, like learning how to make molds and slip casting with ceramics. Like these are things that I just wanted to learn how to do based on some just original projects I wanted to pursue. And so, doing Renegade has kind of been an opportunity to sell some of the things that I've made while I've been learning a medium. for me, Renegade, I've never had to choose one or the other. Like I've never had a year where I'm just purely making things to sell. I feel like I've always exhibited, my fine art alongside with things that are just, again, like they're multiples. I'm just kind of like learning a technique or a medium. I'd say in general, though, that the craft fairs, at least for me, have never really been financially lucrative. So it's just been a way of creating a deadline for myself, showing my work, kind of having wonderful conversations and networking with, another community of artists in Portland and both in the craft fair communities. I've certainly, have rarely gotten ahead with those events.
Yeah. And it sounds like it kind of addresses this other question about sort of staying motivated in your creative practice when you're, when life gets busy in terms of creating those deadlines for yourself.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I feel like you also touched on the idea of like, if creative block is ever an issue with such limited time. And I really think it's just the continuity. I feel like, again, like just having that momentum get interrupted or displaced, it's always this kind of balance of like, oh yeah, that project's been on the back burner for like even a couple years, but I'm still so interested in it. Or like, kind of what has fallen to the wayside and then has resurfaced. It's this really like fluid, organic process of just kind of how things naturally like filter through or filter out. I feel like what's been kind of interesting though is like trying to teach myself some new processes. Like I've also just kind of recently felt satisfied with that. Like I learned how to do what I wanted to do to a level that I'm, satisfied with. And now I just feel myself like kind of pulling away from that. I feel like this might actually be, like my first year that I won't apply for Renegade Craft Fair. So I could try to designate more of those resources to, like making some drawings. Like I'm just really trying to follow what I'm feeling inspired to do and, not trying to treat it too much of as like a formula either.
Like, even though there's benefit in doing it, there might be benefit in switching gears.
There's definitely a benefit in like taking a break, whether or not I have to just schedule some time off work so I can isolate myself and, try to start like a new series of drawings. Like, I feel like that's also like more important than me continuing like this summer travel that, it's a lot of fun, but like it doesn't have to happen every year.
So along those lines of, because I see that as a way of kind of showing your work. Can you talk about showing your work in general? Like, do you have time to submit your art to exhibitions or apply for grants or anything like that? Or have you found other ways, maybe like the craft fair circuit or elsewhere, to get your art out into the physical world?
It's pretty easy to show your work around here. I've had a couple shows since I've been here that have been, like a lot of fun and pretty good exposure. And, again, it's such a small art community that if you can take some decent photos and write a halfway decent press release or artist statement, like you'll get a lot of generous coverage, in the newspaper and like local journal. I feel like it's a pretty accessible community. I have applied to a handful of call for entries, especially for printmaking exhibitions. I've actually never gotten accepted to any of them, but I still feel like it's just really important to like choose how I identify in the art world. And I still feel, I definitely dabble in different media, but I still feel, very close with the printmaking world. And so even if I'm not getting accepted to shows, I still think it's important to try to contribute myself in those ways.
One thing that it's interesting kind of talking about creating deadlines for yourself, because that's something I've really struggled with outside of grad school. So like, how do you feel about making work that might never be seen or sold? Yeah,
I can relate to kind of both aspects of those, kind of what you're addressing. I feel like as a printmaker, everything is a multiple. So I feel like there's so many different opportunities for something to be, exhibited in a fine art gallery context or just like wheat pasted in an alley. I feel like it's a really important medium for, social application and dissemination. I also feel like there's been a million pieces that I've worked on, especially as I'm learning new techniques, that I definitely I'm glad I haven't had to share with the world. It's kind of really rejuvenating and fun to be really bad at something because you've never done it before and you don't have anyone teaching it to you. I mean, I definitely feel more comfortable with not selling work than not showing it. I feel like, especially the more recent bodies of work have been kind of about some, social images and just kind of like this collected aesthetic of Americana or visual communication. And so I feel like it would definitely be sad if they never got seen in any capacity, but it almost doesn't have to happen anymore because, again, we all are our own ambassadors with social media or, even a free website. Like there's just so many opportunities for us to show our art, again, in like a variety of different ways.
So you talked about creative block before. Did you want to say anything else about, again, I'm always so interested with how like artists deal with things with such limited time to begin with. Is there anything else you do to kind of push through those periods? I mean, I feel it sounds like you work on you've got a lot of different projects going. And like you said, like something might be kind of percolating for even like a couple years that will sort of resurface. And I almost feel like in that way of working, there is not really any room for creative block. Like there's always something else that can kind of come up to the surface.
No, I mean, I feel like it's definitely like a challenge that I'll probably have with me for the rest of my life. I feel like there's always a lack of time. I feel that way in all arenas of my life. Like I'm behind in laundry, dishes, getting a drink with a friend. Like I'm definitely I feel like the way that I approach everything, I have to be 100%. I have to be meticulous and careful and present. And so I feel like there's always just this really large chunk of things that are on the back burner for me. Again, just more of like the continuity of creative thought is more of a challenge than like a creative block because I'll always have more ideas than I have time to pursue.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more? Because you said that a couple of times, and I'm really fascinated by this idea of the continuity of creative thought. Like, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Just kind of how odd and irregular like inspiration kind of finds you and just like really wanting to like research or pursue something or just even hearing this, expression that you're just really like holding on to and then just trying to even find ways to turn some of those thoughts. I mean, this is all very abstract, but even to turn some of those thoughts into, art, whether that be creative writing or, a photograph or creating a drawing of it. I just feel like there's all these sparks of inspiration, especially like with my work that may or may not translate into making art. I mean, I definitely would love more time in my schedule to pursue some of these sparks to see if they would turn into more of like a series or, like a larger body of investigation. I'll always feel like I don't have enough time.
So it's like step one is kind of keeping that continuity going. And step two is trying to figure out how to carve out more time.
And also like, probably trying to pursue a better routine of journaling or keeping some of these ideas written down or, like kind of developing that practice is definitely like something I could improve upon. I mean, like I appreciate the kind of organic nebulous process of things kind of flowing in and flowing back out and then kind of like returning to me. But in that process, I've also, I'm sure, let go of some gems, and I could definitely be better about just like organizing those thoughts and maybe more than like a hastily written note on a Post-it note, hanging on my dresser.
My final couple of questions always center around the sustainability of the artist's current juggling act of work, creative practice, and everything else, and whether or not they'd consider quitting their day job to make more time for making art.
I think it's also just kind of important to be aware of when you've kind of satisfied some of the things you originally want to do. I feel like it's important, like with most of our jobs, just to know kind of when you have reached a level of personal satisfaction and when you feel like you've given what you can to a community and just trying to be like self-aware and honest when it might be also time to move on. There will be a time that I've given what I can give and that, I'm going to have to put myself in a different environment, to where I can both benefit myself and benefit my community in a new way. Because I feel like it is possible to reach a plateau, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. in order to pursue some larger projects or, working towards an exhibition. Again, everything that I do, I feel like I have to do it 100%. Finding when that plateau comes, there's certainly been times in my life where I've been able to dedicate more time to my artistic practice. And I'm sure there'll be times that I, will have even less time than I do now. At some point, the balance will, need to tip in that favor of taking care of more things to take care of what I need.
More information about Nicole can be found at artistsandoffices.com. On the next episode of the podcast, I speak with Mike Rothfeld, a Bay Area artist and writer who splits his work and studio time between Oakland and San Francisco. Artists and Offices is produced and edited by me, Rebecca Bird Grigsby. Intro music is provided by Mr. Neat Beats. Show notes and additional episodes can be found at artistsandoffices.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the podcast on iTunes and leave the show a rating or review. This will help the podcast connect with even more artists and offices. Thank you so much for listening.
At some point, I will need a car that's newer than 18 years old and, a laptop that's, less than a decade old at some point.